So with that in mind, make sure that you have your favorite beverage to hand, a quiet space, and also your notebook as well, because I encourage you to take lots of any information, quotes, any ideas that you can steal like an artist, as Picasso said, and really try to get as much out of this experience, this professional development experience as possible. So without further ado, let's introduce our first session, which is a panel session. Our moderator for this session is Charlie Law, founder and managing director at Sustainable Construction Solutions and head of construction and ESG at the Pallet Loop. He has worked in the construction sector for over 35 years and is currently the Sustainability Director at Timber Development UK, the new entity formed by the merger of the Timber Trade Federation and the Timber Research and Development Association. Joining Charlie is Sidonie Immler, partner at Foster and Partners. Sidonie has been a UK qualified and RIBA chartered architect since 2003. With wide-ranging experience in the construction industry, including large, commercial, retail, residential, transportation and cultural projects based in the UK and internationally. She joined the design studio at Foster and Partners in 2008, moving to the technical design group in 2018, focusing on specifications. Her main passion is sustainable architecture, and in recent years concentrating on net zero specification. Sidonie also acts as a mentor to younger architects in the practice. Also with her is Lewis Marshall, UK Area Manager of Abodo Wood, based in the UK. Lewis provides technical support to Abodo distributors and architects across the UK, ensuring they have the knowledge and resources needed to utilise Abodo's timber effectively. Lewis loves building long-term relationships with construction professionals and believes in the power of sustainable, beautiful buildings to improve both our environment and our lives. With them is Charlotte Wark, architect liaison and Rushwood, recently left, but has a huge experience working in wood. She currently works with architects to help specify the best timber and fixing products for their project. With a specific interest in sustainable and healthy business, she understands the important role timber plays in the circular economy. And last but not least is Alice Atiola, head of sales at Ortex UK in the EU. She brings over a decade of industry experience to her role as the head of sales for the UK South, Spain and Middle East at Ortex Acoustics, with a background in interior design. Alice's passion for creative solutions shines through her collaborative approach with clients, ensuring that each project not only meets but exceeds design expectations. As a committed advocate for sustainability, Alice is dedicated to promoting Ortex's innovative product development initiatives to help reduce the built environment's carbon footprint. Enjoy this panel.
So setting the scene, we're here today to talk about circular economy. I'll just set the scene what my thoughts are around circular economy, what I believe we should be doing as an industry around circular economy, and then I'd like to ask the panel what their thoughts are around it and what they're doing in their own businesses. So designing, I've got about 3 or 4 key themes that I believe we should be doing from a circular economy point of view. Designing for resource optimization. So this brings in reuse of existing buildings and materials, including reducing the embodied carbon by looking at things like demolition or pre-redevelopment audits, as well as being resource efficient with any new materials that we use. I think we should also be designing for optimum service life and ease of maintenance. This brings in longer life materials such as things like Abodo wood, and how it can be reduce whole life carbon through reduced maintenance and replacement, so things like that. And in designing for flexibility, deconstruction and disassembly is another key point. Remanufacture and reuse, for example, this will very much focus on end of life and bring materials, brings in things like material passports and sort of reusable systems such as some of the Ortex systems that we've got here today. So really, if I sort of start with Sidonie, what sort of things, how does that definition match your definition of a circular economy, and what steps are Foster and Partners taking to incorporate circular design within their projects? And it obviously ties in with whole life carbon as well, I think also ties in with that. So over to you, Sidonie.
So all of the above that you just mentioned about circularity. But when we look at circularity and how important it is nowadays to consider that within your designs, it's not just about planning ahead, but it's also what we do in the here and now, because we are within a climate emergency. Everybody's seen the news also about Florida. So things are changing in the world. And we have this mandate really now to reduce our embodied carbon by 40% by 2030, and that's only less than 6 years away. If you think about it, that's not long. And we should really be net zero by 2050 in the built environment to be anywhere near the UN protocol of 1.5 degrees Celsius change in temperature. So I think this is the serious part of the evening. It's a real problem, and I think people really need to be aware of it. And circularity within the built environment is a really big, important part. So just, again, I've got a few figures. So at the moment, only 7% of materials that are already in use are being reused. And I'm not talking about recycling, because recycling is one thing, but in terms of reuse, there's not very much. But we also know that by, say, 2050, the building stock will be 80% of what we have now. So we are building new things, but there's a huge stock of old buildings which has a lot of material in it, and that material should be treated with value. So I think that's a really big message, that we see what's already there, and that's also part of circularity. So at the moment, we're only using 7% of when we build. This really needs to increase, and if we bring circularity into our designs, the way we treat our designs, this could be apparently up close to 40% by 2050. So I think it's about looking into the value of materials. That's really important. So what do we do about that in Foster and Partners? So we are doing a really big push and concentrating a lot on embodied carbon in the environment at the moment. So we're looking at each project that we do from an embodied carbon perspective throughout all the design stages. And circularity is part of that. Unless you're building on a greenfield site, which is probably more and more unlikely in the future, you will be building somewhere where there is already a built structure on the site. So you really need to start considering what's there and how much of that can be used, what can be done with it. So we're looking into that for each project. We'll be talking about challenges in a bit. I think that's sort of because it's not that easy. But I think, closing words on this matter, I think circularity has a really big part to play for things that are currently in distribution, that are already being built, but also for the future. And you were touching on that, designing differently for the future. So if we are using raw materials, we should be treating them very differently and sort of really valuing them differently and designing differently with those. To deconstruct, to think ahead, to think holistically of what will happen at the end of the life for that building. Is it adaptable? Is it reusable? And I think that's a really important message.
That's a key message I think we need to get across today, because I think we've always thought we had to build these buildings or design buildings that they had to be really solid and stay up. They're going to be there forever. I think we're realising now that they're not. Certain types of buildings specifically may only last a certain amount of time. So we need to make sure that particularly those buildings that have a shorter life will be dismantleable in the future. So Charlotte, what demands as the architectural liaison, what sort of demands are designers putting on you, are they making when it comes to sustainability and circularity?
I think when it comes to timber, a big focus is on locality, which is interesting. It's something that is brought up quite a lot, and it's not something that I would say is necessarily a valid concern when you know about different types of timber. And I think there's definitely a time and place for local material, and if the industry in the UK was slightly different, maybe it would be different, but it's really important to understand the different materials that you're using, the different species. The lot of material that is grown in the UK will not be suitable for a lot of applications, and that's really important to understand the characteristics of the species that you're looking to use and the project requirements. It's always really important to have that discussion. Something that is grown in Scotland, Scottish larch, for example, will not be able to be used in the same application as something like Abodo. Very different species, and so it's really important to have that conversation. So locality doesn't always, it's something that is brought up quite a lot. It's not something that, it's good to have that conversation, that it doesn't always mean a local material doesn't always mean it's more sustainable. I think another thing that is brought up quite a lot is disassembly, so deconstruction. A lot of what we do at Rustwood and focus on is different fixing systems. So we would only ever really recommend fixing with screws so that you're able to, for a number of reasons, screws just have better holding power. They typically are better quality, which obviously is best if you're looking to design for longevity. Hopefully you are. And they can also be removed so much easier than if you're using nails. So the fixing systems that we use are all kind of really good quality stainless steel fixings, which is really important to be able to take that apart at the end of life. Panelizing systems, modular design is really important as well. So we do have a kind of battening system. Obviously, when you're using kind of timber cladding, you will be fixing that to hopefully some kind of battening system. And a battening system that is not built with preservative treatment so that you can also recycle the battening system at the end of life is really important. Obviously, thermally modified timber comes into that massively, and it can be used for so many different things. So yeah, I would say those are probably the biggest two. Locality and disassembly. Maintenance comes into it as well. Maintaining buildings for longevity and understanding the different maintenance expectations for different species is really important.
And I think, that's a good point, because we've got so many different species of timber all around the world. We've used so many different species in the UK for many, many years because of our trade links with all parts of the world, and we expect certain timbers to do certain things in some cases, and
definitely
we can't always get that from a UK timber.
No,
there are options.
Not all species is created equal.
No, exactly.
I would say
it's a natural product as well.
Yeah.
So that's the whole point. So that's great. What Vortex doing to meet the demands of designers around circular products?
I thought I'd just start with sort of explaining what our material is, in case you don't know. There's obviously quite a large timber conversation here, so just in case you don't know, but our products are made from recycled PET. Well, a good 80% of it is, and then we use 20% virgin PET. So hopefully that will give you a bit of context as to what my angle is on the conversation. But yeah, as a company, we're always designing with circularity in mind, and sort of constantly examining the different materials that we use and how to work with them. Our strategy is really sort of founded on transforming waste into a valuable new product. So driving, and then with that sort of driving like an industry change around that. So our big focus has been really ensuring that the materials that we produce can be repurposed repeatedly, not just a one-hit wonder. And so we have recently actually invested in a large pelletizer. We call it the chipper. It's based up in Elland, but it's actually in all of our manufacturing sites now. And what that does is all of the sort of like manufacturing offcuts and any waste material that we're hoping is going to increase significantly soon from our take-back scheme would then go into that pelletizer. Those pellets can be used for sort of various applications. It's very, very versatile material, is recycled PET, but it does particularly well in sort of like an injection molded environment. And we've created various injection molded products. So that process is actually called re-PET or re-PET, so R-E-P-E-T. So for example, our latest creation that we're like really excited about is Spin Fix. So that is our new adhesive-free method of being able to install our boards onto a wall. And potentially a ceiling system soon once we've got more data, but at the moment predominantly wall. And that is using the re-PET, but it's also, circular by design. So, it's not only made from our offcuts, also like recycled panels, but it's also adhesive free, and it means that, you know, you're preventing that addition of contamination in the installation side, which then makes it very, very difficult to be able to either reuse that product, relocate that product, or even recycle the product at the end of its life. So that has been the biggest issue when it comes to sort of PET and being able to reuse it. So we feel quite excited that we've come up with a solution that is, you know, commercially viable. So it's not massively more expensive than adhesive, but it's also, you know, it's solving that issue, which then hopefully means later down the line we can start to see that product come back through and then redone and reused. In New Zealand, they are so good at it that we have so much waste over there that we're like constantly having to look at new avenues for it to go down, and we hope that the UK will follow suit. So, yeah.
I think that, you know, you sort of touched on a point there where I think we talk about reuse, and we're talking about it's not too much more expensive.
Yeah.
But when you look at it over a whole life and maybe additional lives, then obviously that's where it becomes much more of a value proposition in that situation, because you can actually reuse that material in other locations maybe.
Yeah.
You know, so you're not actually pay for the material, you can reuse existing.
Exactly that, because this material as well is very durable, so it should be living longer than it is currently.
It's got a very long life. It's got a very long product life,
yes,
but a very short actual service life.
Exactly,
in some cases, because of its, you know, interior design
and how it was traditionally installed. Yes,
industry, isn't it? And,
yes.
You know, what's fashionable now is going to be different in 5-10 years.
So true.
Change things around. So
yeah,
great. Come to you, Lewis, as we haven't asked you a question yet. Can you tell us a bit more about Abodo and how your product can assist in meeting the circular economy requirements of designers?
Abodo uses radiata pine, which is a rapidly renewable plantation species. We have ample amounts of it. But in its unmodified state, raw state, it has a durability class of 5. So we have to thermally modify the timber so that it achieves durability class 1. Its expected service life gets up to 30 years uncoated or 60 years coated. I guess, I know we mentioned we were going to talk about challenges later down the track, but what we're doing to try and help do our part for a circular economy is using deconstructable fixing systems, using screws like Charlotte touched on before. Things that are deconstructed that can be resurfaced, reskinned, and then recoated and repurposed. It's got no harmful chemicals in it, so no chemicals, no preservatives, no treatments as such. It's just only heat and steam through its modification method. So it means that, it's non-toxic. So if it were to go into landfill, not that we do want it to, or we want it to go into biomass, ideally we'd like to repurpose it and resurface and use it in an internal space or use it for another external facade.
Exactly. And I think you started talking about the fixing systems there. I think traditionally, things like cladding, we'd fix them with ring shank nails, which, very difficult to get out if you've ever tried to get a ring shank nail out of anything. But like I say, moving over to something simple as a screw, it doesn't take much longer if, at all. And it gives you that option to demount a bit. We touched on challenges, and if we come back to Sidonie, what are the key challenges that you're seeing to enable us to move to a circular economy?
Again, I think you can talk about different challenges for existing stock and then for future circularity, so two different things. So for future circularity, what you were talking about is demountability, designing for reassembly and all of that. I think shouldn't be a big challenge, but it is often a barrier when you bump into industry where tried and tested is what they do. So to come along and say, no, we don't want this bonded, we want it mechanically fixed, for instance, we don't like adhesive, that can be a challenge because people like what they know. So you have to sort of convince them that there's a better option. So I think that's something. I think also just touching on that for the future and also for current stock, material passports will be very important. So whatever we build or materials or products we include need to be traceable. So I think that's a really important thing that will come into place that maybe currently isn't quite there yet. So you keep track of what is being built in a building. For existing stock, it gets a bit more tricky because there's a whole problem about categorization, testing, performance, logistics. If you have a building where you have assets within that building, you have materials, you have to first of all audit the building, find out what's in there, then it has to be valued, it has to be retested for it to be reused. So there are unfortunately quite a lot of barriers for existing materials at the moment, but hopefully they will be overcome and there'll be more protocols on how to deal with that.
So I think you touched on a couple of bits there. Sort of reuse of existing materials, and is that a lack of standards? I think
it is. Yes.
Work being done in the steel industry, for example.
Yes, steel works quite well already. I think. Yeah. Yes.
We've seen similar stuff being done up in Napier for timber, not as far advanced as steel, but I think that's where we need to get to. We need to get that,
new standards. Get them tested.
New timber,
yes.
Steel,
yes.
New concrete.
Yes.
Talk about reuse.
Yes, exactly. And then eventually you will need those in place for the new products we're using now, because in, say, 20 years' time, they will have to be retested if they're being reused.
And obviously that's where the material passports come in.
Yes.
Yeah. With that, you've got all the information in that material passport.
Yes.
Hopefully that's in a digital form.
Yes.
So maybe in the BIM model or box.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The BIM object is there's the information
included
in the BIM object. That's
what
we should be looking at.
Yes.
So, to pass on to that, Alice, maybe, what challenges are you seeing challenges, or are you being challenged by architects and circular economy design?
So, I mean, I'd say very similar is mindset. So, we're going now we've got our route to market would be obviously specification via architects, interior designers, but then it's generally installers that are then subcontractors that are then installing our product. We don't have that service ourselves. So we have to go and convince people that have been working in a way that has proven very well for them for years and years and years to move away from that and to go for something that might be actually a little bit more time consuming, a little bit more labor intensive, that they don't really know, and then convince them that that's going to be the best solution moving forward, which can come with its challenges. But to be honest, there's also been quite a good response to it as well. I think people have seen that there is the requirement and we have to move that way. But yeah, it's been a little bit, the conversations can be a little bit tricky at first, just to keep them on that route and to make sure that actually gets installed in that method. Also going into places and seeing, I'm getting more questions now from architects to assess a building of maybe a client, they're working with a client that they'd previously worked with. What can we reuse? And seeing that it's a shame because a lot of the stuff that's been put on the walls, we can't reuse that. Unfortunately, that there isn't a solution for that. It just needs it's contaminated. So it's good to see that there is a need for that, but unfortunately it doesn't help now. But that's a future benefit that's going to benefit from that. But that's current.
And I think that's a key thing. Is obviously we've used materials in the past, and whether it's a preservative treatment or an addition into plastics or something like that, which is now seen as hazardous. And we've got persistent organic pollutants and stuff like that in plastics and things like that, which means we can't actually reuse that product going forward and things like that. In furniture, there's lots of things coming up at the moment. Charlotte, what challenges are you seeing from your clients?
I think really similarly to Alice, it's getting people to shift their mindset. I think timber is maybe more mainstream, definitely more mainstream, and it's understood to be installed in a certain way, and that isn't necessarily the most sustainable way going forward. It's not going to be able to be recycled in the way that we would hope it can be now, or we know it can be, because it's been fixed a certain way, or previously they used a fire retardant that had really horrible, nasty chemicals in them. And it's, like Alice has said, it's about what we have now is very different to what we were using 20, 30 years ago. So whoever was designing buildings back then, you've really messed it up for the rest of us. I would say it's changing that mindset. The way that you do that is it's not by necessarily having these conversations, though. It's by policy, and that's not something that I think we are working towards. That unfortunately, it's not something I have too much control over. And we do work really closely with people who are policymakers who are interested in changing the regulations to make it a requirement to be fixing a certain way or to be including thinking about the circular economy in their designs, but I think we definitely have a long way to go in that. Fingers crossed we'll get there.
Lewis, anything to add to that?
I mean, Abodo in itself has its own sort of challenges. I don't know if I mentioned, we're a New Zealand-based company, so a lot of our manufacturing takes place in New Zealand, supply through our architectural partners like Russwood. So in terms of challenges that we face, transport is probably one of them. Not really having a manufacturing plant on the ground in the UK poses its own challenges in a sense. Back home in New Zealand, we have our own sort of way of approaching it. I mean, even from an internal waste, creating our shingles product. So whenever we've got defects, timber's lovely to work with, but it all comes with its challenges. Resin pockets, chip out, and anything in between. So we started remanufacturing our own waste product and creating an internal circular product. But yeah, transport's mainly another one, I guess, really, and planning. I mean, it has to go through the whole chain in terms of reuse and recyclability. It can't just be at one point, otherwise it will break down. I mean, otherwise, let's say you want to pull cladding or timber facade elements off the external of a wall at end of life, but it wasn't really thought about in the design stage. Most likely the people that are deconstructing are going to go with the most cost-effective or easiest route.
Yeah.
So I think it really does need to flow through the whole process.
Yeah.
But again, it's going to come with its own challenges without policy.
Yeah, and I think I think a few of you have touched on logistics as well. I think that's one of the key things that we're seeing, and I know with my Pallet Loop hat on, that is one of the key things that we had to try and solve when we come up with a Pallet Loop solution. We had to put a logistics solution in place to make sure we could get that product back from the construction site and redistribute it out going forward. And I think that's something that we all need to look at, because the logistics solutions for delivering stuff is very well set up and very efficient, but actually getting stuff back, there just doesn't really exist at the moment. It's very difficult to get stuff back, and I think you've got your take back scheme, Alice, I think you mentioned there. Are you finding that as a problem?
It's who's responsible for that, who's taking that on, and we try to have conversations so that it's written into sort of an OEM manual, or there's something there to show that it can come back, but it's like, is that with the demolition, is that with the contractor, is that with the client, whose responsibility is that to make sure that it does get back to us? And like I said, then there's also the added complexity with ours that we need to make sure that it hasn't been contaminated and it hasn't got anything else that's been done to it, so then that's why I think we've come forward with the spin fix solution to aid with the ease of bringing that material back, knowing that then it hasn't been contaminated, and it does make it easier for people to demount off a wall and all those things. It's trying to make it as easy as possible, but again, I still think it's not always, I don't know if it's that simple as to who takes on that responsibility to sort that and the cost of that, because it will be more expensive, I think.
There's going to be a cost of demounting something, but is that going to be offset by the reduced cost of not having to buy a new product because you can reuse existing? I think that's where we need to find where that price point is, and make sure that's going to work going forward. Has technology made, or is technology making the circular economy more attainable going forward? Is that, do you see technology helping with moving circular economy forward?
I have an answer for that. Definitely, even just from a kind of building model perspective. So obviously, the way that things are going now, there's a massive focus on having really developed BIM models, in that being able to link manufactured data is really helpful. Being able to link fixing data and how to actually properly fix something, and then for that model to be shared with the people who are actually doing the building. I think there's sometimes, unfortunately, inconsistencies with how the building goes ahead. It may have been designed in a very meticulous, beautiful way. If it's not fixed like that, then likely you will encounter problems. So I think technology has really helped in that sense. I do think we're not completely there yet with not every project has a building model, obviously, and not a building model that is so advanced compared to probably likely bigger commercial projects. And maybe going forward in the future, that will be more standard, even for slightly smaller projects. It'll be interesting to see, but definitely I've noticed people even just being able to send out a PDF. Not that that's necessarily a new thing, but 30 years ago you maybe couldn't do that. So
No, we had to rely on faxes back then. I'm afraid.
yeah. I don't even know what that
remember
is. I'm kidding, I do, but yeah. I'm sure there's other answers.
Any other answers before we move on?
Yeah, I guess I'd say from like our manufacturing point of view, we've found that, you know, technology advancement has made us more efficient at manufacturing. It's made us reduce waste. It's made us being able to, like quite recently, change how we manufacture from 60% recycled content up to 80%. And that's, you know, through advancement in technology and in how we blend our fibers and all of those sort of things. So all of this contributes, doesn't it, overall to sort of a more sustainable material and then having less wastage and using less water and using less energy, and also sort of having the technology as well to sort of monitor our sort of like carbon and who we are as a business and what we do and what we consume. All of those things make you evaluate, change, get better, evaluate, change, get better again. And so that's what I've noticed, even just from the 3 years that I've worked at Ortex, the amount of change and stuff. And that's because we've grown and learned, and that's through technology advancement. So, yeah.
And yeah, maybe just to add to that, so you mentioned BIM models. That's already, everybody has heard about them or is using them. There's definitely technology and advancements on the side of circularity in terms of marketplaces. So, and interestingly enough, there's a lot of tech firms moving into the building industry now because they're creating software for sharing materials, for detecting materials. There'll be a lot more technology in terms of barcoding each and every product, each and every material. So that'll be inert, and it'll be part of a requirement to get a CE mark or to get some other accreditation. So I think definitely technology is advancing quite fast there, and it just needs to sort of have that final push and come together. And it's a bit fragmented at the moment. I think that's the problem, that there is no common route to compliance at the moment.
Good. You mentioned barcoding. Yeah, one of the things we're doing with the pallet loop, every one of them has got an RFID tag on it. So we know where the journey of every individual pallet, which is good. Anything to add to that, Alex, before we finish?
Just touching again on what Alice said. Just basically trying to reduce our carbon emissions. Essentially, technology's enabled us to do so much now. Electric forklifts, solar power. Thermal modification. Our kilns are still run on diesel. I know you frowned at me when I told you that earlier on. But we're trying to improve our carbon emissions from that side as well. So trying to shift to more biomass.
Biomass, yeah.
But these sorts of things take time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it will help.
And that's all part of the investment. But I think that's one of the things that we've sort of picked up in the TDUK Net Zero Roadmap is there's things we can do, but they take time, and we need to have the investment plan in place to prove that it's going to work. Good stuff. Well, if there's no further questions, I think if we'd like to thank our panelists in a normal way. Thanks very much for your time.
Okay, I truly hope you enjoyed that panel. Hopefully you got a lot from it and gleaned a lot of information and insights. Feel free to reach out to the panelists, find them on LinkedIn, hit them up through their respective organizations and follow up with any queries or questions and just ideas that you have for collaborations. I'm sure they'd be very keen to hear from you. A quick prize giveaway, a spot prize giveaway to see if you are paying attention, and also just to give you a quick thanks and get a chat going on as well. So the first person to respond in the chat with the answer for the following question will win, and I'm just going to look at my notes, the Architectural Styles, a visual guide from Thames and Hudson, the book that is. So we're going to ask you a quick question. The first person to respond will receive this, and Jay will sort you out for that. So the question to win this book will be, what was the full name of the moderator of that last panel session? What was the full name of that moderator? Chuck them in the chat room very quickly. If you've already won, Jay will sort you out and contact you direct, and will ask you for your address and get you that book over to yourself. So thank you for paying attention. Just a nice little prize giveaway there to make sure that you're awake, and also to have some fun as well. We really appreciate you as a community coming together and devoting some time and energy and attention to this session. So moving along and keeping the pace going, let's get into our next speaker, our final speaker of the day, just one individual, and let me give him a proper introduction. Our next speaker is Will Arnold, Head of Climate Action at the Institute of Structural Engineers. He leads the institution's response to the climate emergency, bringing this action into all aspects of the organization's work, including the publication of best practice emergency guidance. Prior to his current role, he was a practicing structural engineer at Arup for over 10 years. He sits on the Structural Awards judging panel and is a member of the editorial advisory group for the Structural Engineer.
Hi, I'm Will Arnold. I'm Head of Climate Action at the Institution of Structural Engineers, the IStructE. And I'm really grateful to be able to talk to you today on this CPD course. I'm going to talk to you about the work we've been doing at IStructE over the past sort of 5 years now, in terms of changing the way we approach structural engineering to try and embed sustainability at the centre of it. Okay, so let's go. I'm really grateful to be asked to tell this story. It doesn't happen very often, but it's quite nice to sort of reflect on the work that we've been doing. And for me, it's been as much of a personal journey as a professional one. And so I'm going to sort of tell you this story from my point of view, which of course is not going to give you the entire story, but it's just one version of events. And so for me, actually, this is probably the photo that sums up when it all started. So this, I don't know if you can spot me on this photo. I'm somewhere in the middle. I've got big, baggy, sort of elephant print trousers on. I've got a pack of cards in my hand, and my beard is even more out of control than it is when I speak to you today. And this photo is taken absolutely in the middle of nowhere. It's in the Philippines, on the main island of the Philippines. It's outside of a little village called Agani. The nearest city was a very small city called Tuguegarao, which is about an hour's flight from Manila, or a day's drive from Manila. And to get from there to where this photo is taken, you've then got another sort of half an hour by a sort of rickety shared bus, and then a half an hour walk at the other end. So it really felt like the middle of nowhere. And this photo is taken at about 8 o'clock at night. It's 35 degrees C still. It's sort of 80-90% humidity. You can tell by what people are wearing or not wearing in the photo. And all the people on this photo are volunteers, working for an organisation that was helping to rebuild a school in the area, and I was there as part of that rebuild as a volunteer. And this photo is the moment when the woman sort of pictured standing in the middle of the shot, Emily, gathered all the volunteers together at a moment's notice and told us we only had 48 hours in which to leave the Philippines. And the reason why that's the case is because this photo was taken in March of 2020. Manila was shutting down in the way that the rest of the world was shutting down because of the COVID pandemic that had now taken over the whole globe. And so we'd been given 48 hours to get out of the country, after which Manila was going to shut its borders to the world. There'd be no flights, no boats, no nothing. And like I said, we were at least a day's travel from Manila Airport. So first thing in the morning, the whole crowd sort of hot-footed to the city of Tuguegarao and tried to join these horrendous queues to try and get on some planes over to Manila and out of the country. And I got on one of the last flights out of the Philippines before the country shut down. Now, you might be wondering why on earth I'm telling you all of this at the start of a presentation about institutional change on sustainability. And the reason why I start with this is because COVID was a bit of a line in the sand for a lot of people. You know, it marked a change from one way of life to another. I often sort of use BC to mean before COVID these days when talking about events in the past. And for me, the line in the sand was drawn because this marks the point in my professional journey where I really started to move from mainstream structural engineering across into the world of sustainability. Now, to understand that and to get the full context of that, we have to go back a few more steps. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to start by going back about 10 years before COVID hit. So I was a practicing structural engineer with Arup for about 10 years. I joined them straight out of university. I got very lucky with how I got into the firm in the first place, and that's a whole other story. So I felt quite grateful to be there. And I felt particularly grateful with the sorts of projects that I got put on. I got to design and help work on the design of some amazing sort of quite arty and unusual projects around the world. I got to travel quite a lot. I got to go to all of these cool concept design meetings with architects where we get our big fat pens and sketch out structural diagrams on big pieces of trace paper. And over time, through this career at Arup, I found myself being drawn more and more to the idea that buildings and structures should be creating substance and useful outcomes for people and for the planet. And for the profession of structural engineering, when I was being asked what sort of work I wanted to do, say in my end of year appraisal, or when I was speaking to my boss sort of casually, I realized I was drawn to the sorts of projects that created something really useful for people or for the profession or for nature. And this only grew with strength over time. And I went through this decade at Arup trying to get hold of these projects, trying to sort of see if I could wangle my way into projects where I could work on more and more useful stuff. And then one day in 2018, I was given the opportunity to apply to work on the design of a brand new university in Rwanda, of all places, which is a very small country in the middle of Africa that I'd never really heard of before this opportunity came up. And this was a tipping point for me. So this project was the Rwanda Institute for Conservation and Agriculture, often shortened to the acronym RICA. And it's a 57 building brand new university campus in the south of the country. And to give you a sense of scale, I mean, this photo shows most of the campus. All of these buildings were built new as part of this project. It's about 20,000 square meters of teaching space and accommodation. The campus as a whole, which is basically everything you can see in this photo, is something like 3,500 acres. And I applied to do this project because I was attracted to the scale of it, the fact that it was in an unusual place that I thought would be quite cool to go live in for a year. And because it gave me the opportunity to work with a local engineering and architecture team that I'd never worked with before, and I was really sort of curious to be able to interact with them and work with them and understand how they approach structural engineering and design, and be able to learn from them as much as sharing what I knew about the profession in return. And the purpose of this project in itself was inherently sustainable. This was the design of an agricultural school. This is a country whose population is set to double by 2050. But as a country, it's already full. Every patch of land across the country is fully farmed. As you drive through the country, and it's got a nickname being the land of 1,000 hills, and you drive through these windy roads and you look out on both sides of you into these valleys and across these hillsides, everything is covered in farmland as much as it can be. And you get farmland that's sort of scattered with trees in between. It's quite beautiful, but there's really no more space to grow more stuff. And so the real question Rwanda was asking itself was, how do we farm more sustainably going forward so that we can support this increasing population without having to become reliant on countries around us to import food and so on. So the purpose of the project was very sustainable, but the architects, a firm called Master Design Group, they wanted to go much, much further than this. They wanted to build these buildings with earth walls, with timber roofs where the timber was sourced as locally as possible, and with stone foundations, all of which, I should point out as a structural engineer, are pretty awful materials to use in an earthquake zone. There's a moderate level of seismicity in Rwanda, particularly in this side of the country. And so using big, heavy, brittle materials like earth is not generally the best place to start. And we actually relied on the New Zealand codes for earthquake design for this to help us through this process. But this was part of the reason why I applied to it. This sounded like an interesting challenge. I was there because of the architecture, because of the structural engineering challenges, because of the adventure, because this project was bold. It was nothing, to be honest, it was nothing to do with the sort of sustainability aspects of the project at the time. But it exposed me to these conversations that I hadn't been part of before. where people were talking about, the need to minimize our use of concrete and steel and only use it where nothing else would work. And the reason we wanted to do this, of course, was to minimize what I then discovered was called embodied carbon that lots of other people had been talking about for many years and I'd never really picked up on. This project tackled almost every single of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It had this really, really beautifully broad brush approach to picking up on sustainability across all social and environmental aspects, including how we used labour on site, how we use this project to educate and train up parts of society who maybe didn't have access to construction training and would therefore be able to use this as a sort of stepping stone into further employment going forwards. And of course, from an environmental point of view, our choice of materials, the choice to create on-site solar, design the campus to be off-grid in terms of its use of water and so on, was all there to try and enhance the environment rather than detract from it. The embodied carbon footprint, by the way, of this campus as a whole is somewhere around 250 to 300 kilograms of carbon per square metre, and that's across all disciplines, not just the structure. This is a brand new project, bear in mind. That's, I think, about a third of the sort of business as usual embodied carbon footprint of a university project. So I finished this 1 year secondment and I returned to the UK to be sort of shocked all of a sudden to be surrounded back by business as usual. And I kept saying, like, if this stuff was possible in the middle of a country that many of my colleagues back in the UK had never heard of, why on earth was it not possible to do stuff like this in the UK? And it turned out it was quite good timing to be asking questions like that, because when I got back to the UK, this was the start of 2019. And this was the point when something of a sustainability revolution was starting to happen around the world. It's easy to forget now, I think, because we're sort of 6 years on, and I'd say that the level of effervescence about sustainability is we've lost a bit of the fizz out of it in the past few years, as lots of parts of sort of business as usual have tried to push back. But 2019 was the year of school strikes. It was the year where Greta Thunberg made her name. It was the world waking up to climate change in the mainstream conversation, not just people who had sort of been campaigning on this for decades and generations, but getting into mainstream literature. The phrase climate emergency became a real thing. The UK government in 2019 passed, we declared a climate emergency as a country, and we then passed a net zero 2050 law in the UK. So this was a moment of real change. And in the UK, there was a movement called, it started out with something called Architecture Declares, or Architects Declare. And then this declaration piece grew into something called Built Environment Declares. And the point was that this was firms across the built environment declaring a climate and biodiversity emergency. Firms standing up and saying, we declare this is an emergency, the climate's breaking down, nature's breaking down, and we need to do things about it. And the declaration includes a bunch of points about things that these firms are going to do to work on all of that. This was a sort of awakening for the profession. I'd say that this is about the point in time when, as structural engineers, we started to sort of gain awareness that we were probably responsible for thousands of tons of carbon emissions per year in our work, and that was something we needed to start to get a handle on. And that when you compared that to the the sort of tens of tons of carbon that we talked about in our private life, nothing else mattered more than trying to cut carbon in our professional life. And there became an awareness that major building projects could be measured in thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of tons of carbon emissions, and that talking about reusable cups on our way to Starbucks just wasn't going to cut it as a profession anymore. And I'd been talking enough about the UN SDGs since I got back from Rwanda that I was asked if I would share what I'd learned about them with the board of the Institution of Structural Engineers, and put to them a sort of manifesto for change. I sort of came on the coattails of a number of people who've been speaking about the need to do more on sustainability at the institution for many years. But this was, like I say, there was this tipping point because of the school strikes and because of Engineers Declare. And so in July 2019, I gave this talk. This has now been re-recorded and it's available online if you want to watch it, called The Targeted Approach to the UN SDGs. And I was trying to make the argument that as an institution, there are some SDGs that we have more impact on than others. and that those that we can have big impacts on, actually our impact could be really massive when it comes to climate change, use of natural resources, the impacts we have on natural habitats through our extraction of sand and gravel and limestone to make cement and all of those things. That impact's really, really huge, and that puts us in quite a privileged position to be able to do something about it. And I really didn't feel like I knew enough about this topic at the time. I've got to admit, I mean, I still don't today. I think of myself more as a conduit for others in the profession rather than being a so-called expert myself. So what I did when I'd been asked to present this presentation was to call on all of those around me in Arab who did know in quite a lot of sort of deep technical depth about these topics, and got them to help sort of feed ideas into me. And I wrote and rewrote and practiced this because I realized that there was a real opportunity here to try and firmly push the door open that had been cracked open within the last year. And at that board and council meeting that I presented at, there was this real feeling of something new was going to happen now. And off the back of that presentation, all these other things that are built up to these points, there was a motion passed by the board of the institution that from now on we would treat sustainability exactly the same as we'd always treated safety and life safety within the institution. There was a recognition that they're basically the same thing. It's just that the timescales are different. If you destroy the climate and nature, people die, perhaps in a different place to where you build a project, and perhaps it takes longer than it takes to construct the project, but it does cause human suffering. And so we would treat sustainability and safety as the same from now on. And that was a really sort of like exciting time to be part of the institution. And of course, at which point I buggered off, went traveling for it was planned to be about a year's worth of travel all over Asia, which led me to the Philippines, and led me to that photo that I showed you before. And like I say, that then resulted in me flying back into England at 2 days' notice after Manila said they were going to shut down. And I went from 30 degrees heat and 90% humidity back to wearing 2 jumpers and warm cups of tea in the middle of rural England. And when I got back, I think it took 5 days before Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister here at the time, decided to shut down the country in the UK. So I'd gone from this sort of travel in the world piece to basically being locked in my in-laws' house, trying to not go too crazy. And because I got back from my travels sort of 3 months earlier than planned, I didn't really have much to do. And so I got in touch with the institution. I said, I remember giving this talk. I remember it was quite well received, and it sounds like the institution's now trying to do things to push sustainability forwards. I've got some time on my hands. Can I please help? And I was paired up with an engineer called Mike Cook, who used to be the chairman of Bureau Happold. And it was Mike who had set up Structural Engineers Declare, so that declaration movement that went alongside Architects Declare and so on. And Mike and I spoke, and we started plotting maybe, and we started to work out this plan for creating this change at the institution that I'm about to take you through. I should say, by the way, that this idea of forming what you see on the screen in front of you, a climate emergency task group, that had been put forward completely in my absence. That was an idea that I think had been proposed in about November of 2019. There had been a big sustainability conference whilst I'd been away, that was partly off the back of that mandate to treat sustainability the same as safety. And so there was this idea that the institution was going to form a task group around the climate emergency and try and put some real effort into it. But it was only really when Mike and I started working together in the March of 2020 that we really started to flesh out what that would look like and what we would do with it. So that leads me into what we then did next. And there's quite a lot to be. There's no real way to sort of say that while sounding modest. We've done quite a lot in the last 5 years. I'm really, really proud of the change that we've made. And later this week, we're going to be launching a special report at the institution that looks back on 5 years of change that you'll be able to download from our website, whether you're a member or not. And it will contain loads of hyperlinks within it to all these various bits of work that we've done over the years. So I would encourage you to have a look at it. But to give you a sort of brief run through, I've got a series of slides now that give you a feel of the sorts of things we did over that time. The first thing I remember saying to Mike when he sort of said to me, like, well, what do you think we should do about this, Will? the first thing I said was we really needed to normalise this topic of sustainability. It was sort of evident that there's this opportunity now where the public was talking about sustainability in a way they hadn't done before, and we needed structural engineers to see this as just an inherent part of their role. So we started generating guidance. We have a monthly magazine that goes out to members and had been landing on doorsteps of all of our members every month for years. And we spoke with the editor and we said, is there any chance that maybe from the middle of this year, we could take over a section of the magazine month on month where we put in climate guidance? And this, the image in the middle of the slide right now that says nothing matters more and has a picture of the earth on it, that was the starting point of this. It was kind of interesting. I believe this is the first time there'd been a front cover of this magazine without a picture of a building or a structure on it. Arguably, if you zoom in really, really far to that photo of the earth, you might be able to spot some buildings. But certainly on the printed copy, that's not quite possible. And I think it was it wasn't so well received by the people who assumed that their project that was being featured that month was going to get the cover shot. They got replaced by a photo of the earth. But this kick-started a sort of internal revolution. And every month since then, there's been climate guidance in the Structural Engineer magazine, a lot of which, by the way, I should say, we've given away completely for free to anyone who wants it. So there's this thing on the website called the Sustainability Resource Map. I'm not 100% sure whether or not this QR code works. It might be out of date. If it doesn't, just Google IStructE Sustainability Resource Map. This is a PDF you can download. It's got about 400 links in it to different bits of guidance. I'd say probably about 300 or 350 of which we've written, and then there's a handful more of stuff that we reference that's on other websites. And it's categorizing all these topics around carbon and lean design and circular economy and influencing the brief and things like that. And the job that I sort of took on during these early days wasn't to write any of this, because like I said, I definitely wasn't an expert on this stuff. But I knew that there were people around us within the institution's membership who were. So we would work out what topics we thought people needed to learn about. And it was basically my job to find the right person to write it, help them write it quickly, make sure that the way they were writing was, easy to understand, it was accessible, and get it published, get it reviewed and then get it published as quickly as we could. And you get a sort of sense of the scale of guidance that we produced from the resource map. There's some specific items that I think are worth calling out within that, and one of them, probably the most key of all, was our guide, How to Calculate Embodied Carbon. If you haven't seen this before, I'd encourage you to download it, because this, obviously it's written for structural engineers, but it's applicable to any discipline. It's a sort of 60, 70 page guide. It's completely free, whether you're a member or not. There was a decision made early on that some of our key pieces of sort of thought leadership were going to be given away to the industry for free, because as an institution, we wanted to show how we could help on this topic, not just for our members, but for the wider industry. We have a mandate to society at the end of the day as an institution, not just to our members. And this guide was a real sort of keystone of that, because it gives you step-by-step practical instructions on how you calculate embodied carbon, what the nuances are, what to think about when you're doing it, what's important. And this was really key, because this didn't exist in any sort of form. There wasn't a guide like this in the industry pre-2020. We've just published our third edition of this. I think it goes live, actually it might be going live next week. But I guess we've gone on to a third edition within 4 years, which tells you how fast this area is evolving. But we keep it up to date because it's so important as a topic. It's, this is the real sort of entry point for structural engineers into the world of sustainability. And we also launched this tool on the right. It's an Excel based, it's a spreadsheet that basically just takes the guide and interprets it for you. We developed this with a firm called Elliott Wood, who are very kind to give their time for free in the development of this. It's based on a tool that they had already built in-house. And between the tool and the guide, this enabled our members to do all these carbon calculations very, very quickly, so they could start to understand which of their designs would be higher or lower carbon, and what to do about it, what to do about those carbon hotspots within their designs. This has been followed up by a few other guides. One in particular that I like to call out is circular economy and reuse. Again, I think this is important because something like this didn't exist until we published it. So we published this in 2022, and there's plenty of books out there that talk about the sort of principles of circular economy design. There's a few really good books out there that give you loads and loads of case studies. There's one by Duncan Baker Brown. I've got it on my shelf above me because I've forgotten what it's called. It's called the Reuse Atlas, and it's got something like 80 real-world examples of circular economy design. But nobody had written a book on how you reuse steel elements, timber elements, brick, concrete facades on projects, what the steps were that you have to go through in order to be able to take them out of an old project and rebuild them and put them into a new project. And so we launched this guide. This is quite a thick guide. I think it's 200 pages long. And it's because it covers reuse of buildings as well as reuse of materials and elements. But this, again, this has been quite a sort of turning point in terms of helping provide this level of depth of information to members. And then at the sort of the other end of the scale, we've then got our book on regenerative design. This came out last year, and regenerative design is it's a different approach to design where you are viewing the act of design not just as something where you deliver on the brief of the client and you try and do less harm in the process through this sort of sustainability lens, but where you actually design in a way that considers the whole system that sits around your project. So everything from where the materials are sourced through to those construction processes, putting them together, through to all of the people who interact with the building, whether it be people who walk past it, help build it, help maintain it, use it, or maybe just live in the surrounding area, and all of the impacts on nature that go alongside all of those things, and then ways to design that maximize the positive benefits to all parts of that system. It's more, I guess it's more of a sort of thought leadership book than a guide, but it's been quite well received. And so I'd say that if you're at the sort of front end of sustainability and you want to see what's coming next, I think the topic of regenerative design is that thing. And I would encourage you to have a look at this book on our website. There's a free sort of sample that you can download first if you want to see what's in it. Alongside all of this, in terms of guidance, we created training courses. So an embodied carbon basics course that kind of takes you step by step through what's in our guide, how to calculate embodied carbon. We designed a more in-depth course that we run over 5 weeks with people online. It's called Net Zero Structural Design. It's taught by myself and a conceptual design teacher, so a guy called Ollie Broadbent. He teaches creative thinking and concept designs, and we realize that kind of if you pair that up with sustainability knowledge, you get quite a good approach towards designing in ways that lead you towards low carbon and preferably net zero solutions. Beyond just guidance, we're also keen to make some other slightly more sort of systemic changes to the way the institution works. So we created guidance for people who were coming in to present training courses, give CPD courses, maybe people who are going to write articles in our magazine. We gave them guidance on the sorts of things we would like them to consider within the writing of that guidance from a sustainability point of view. So what would be the questions they should be able to ask themselves and answer on their topic when it comes to sustainability. We updated a whole load of our standards in terms of what we require from our members. So this works differently in different countries, but in the UK, to become a chartered structural engineer, you have to meet criteria that the IStructE sets, and that's a title that we sort of protect and hold quite dearly to ourselves, chartered structural engineer, and we set the requirements for this. And if you want to become a member of the institution from anywhere in the world, you have to pass these requirements. And so we updated those to include the requirement to be sort of carbon literate in terms of calculating embodied carbon, reducing it, communicating it to clients, and being able to consider wider sustainability aspects within that work, such as the broader benefits of reuse, for example. This gets tested both through the professional development process you go through, but also through our chartered engineer exam that we make people sit, which is a kind of design a building in a day sort of exam. As part of that design, now you have to be able to do your carbon calculations as part of it. And interestingly, we made the decision to not really give much more time for you to be able to do them in, because we know that your clients aren't giving you much extra time for you to do these calculations in either. But it is still an important part of the work. And then I think the last thing I'd sort of say about the change we made within the institution was around our approach to how we determine excellence. So we've had the structural awards in place for many decades now. These are project awards. So every year people submit projects they believe to be sort of best structures that have been built that year. And in the past, these projects were categorized based on either what they were used for. So we used to have categories around commercial buildings and residential and so on. And then more recently, that's been transformed into the structural challenges of them. So there was the Tall Buildings Award and the Long Span Structure Award and things like that. And we made another refresh of this in 2022, where we started to judge projects based on their own merits and based on the outcomes that they delivered for these 4 attributes on the screen. So, what was the benefits to the planet of this project? What were the benefits to people, to society, to those working on the project? Benefits in terms of the process, by which we mean the design process, the construction process. What good did this project do to sort of advancing those processes? And what good has it done to the profession? How has it had a broader impact than just the impact on that one project? So this was our way of sort of trying to redefine what we mean by excellence within structural engineering. And hopefully you see that between you've got the sort of guidance at one end that gives you the ability to change the way you design as a structural engineer. We've then got the membership standards and the requirements we hold members to. And then at the far other end of the spectrum, we've got this definition of excellence and what is it we pride ourselves on as structural engineers. And we changed all of these things over the course of a few years to inherently get them to respect the natural world, respect the climate, talk about those outcomes on people and nature and the climate as part of that work. And it became really core to everything we've done. It's also worth pointing out, I think, that this all happened while the wider construction industry has been changing. So, of course, we've not been alone with any of this, and we've always been quite keen to work with our partners across the industry to create wider change and be a sort of catalyst in ways that we can. Like I say, this happened during Built Environment Declares kicking off in 2019. And so the IStructE said, well, we're going to champion embodied carbon, for example, but others are championing other topics as well. And we've been trying to stay joined up with them in the work that we've all been doing to move these things forwards. Some examples of that include something called Part Z, which was a collaboration with some colleagues who work in the sort of architecture world and the MEP world. And this was to pull together a proposed new regulation for the building regulations in the UK, where at the moment, and this is again different in different countries, but in the UK, there's no legal limits on the emissions around embodied carbon. You can use as much material as you want. So, I always say that if you dig a hole in your back garden to the center of the earth and you fill it with concrete, as long as you've not caused any damage to anyone else's property, you can do that. If you can afford all of those millions and millions of tons of cement to drop into the ground or any other material for that matter, that's entirely fine. That's up to you. And it's nuts because we live in an age where, of course, we do have regulation on things like energy use in buildings. So we worked cross industry to propose what these changes would be to regulation. I keep hoping that one day I'm going to be able to give this presentation and say, and we were successful and we've seen that change happen. But we're not there yet in the UK. We're not there yet at all, unfortunately. It's despite the huge support that we've had from across the industry over here for this idea. Everything from major national firms and international firms that look after your money and invest in development, down to small SMEs. And we've had support in the government from backbench MPs as well as people in the House of Lords. That's a sort of upper house, if you like. There is support for this, but we've not got there yet. It's interesting because in the EU we have seen this legislation passed now. And from 2028, there's a requirement in the EU to report the embodied carbon or the whole life carbon, actually, emissions of building design. And I'm still confident this will happen in the UK. It's just a case of when rather than if. But yeah, hopefully next time I give this talk to somebody, I'll be able to say that this has passed. But I think what was interesting about Part Z is that even though this hasn't yet become law, the industry talks about it as if it's inevitable and as if it will become law. And so we've seen a lot of the changes happen that we would expect this legislation to bring in anyway. We've seen those changes happen anyway. So within weeks of Part Z going up on the website, we were aware that we had house builders and developments all talking about how on earth they were going to meet it when it did inevitably come in. So it has created change, even though we haven't yet created the full sort of legislative change we really wanted to. The other example, there's only two in this sort of section. The other example of real cross-industry collaboration is on the net zero carbon building standard, which in a way was the industry's response to Part Z not being brought in yet. So we've not legislated on this. We've, as a country, we've not pulled the big regulation lever. So of course, the other big lever for changing the way things happen in the construction industry is the finance lever. So how do you move that? You make it easier for people to finance the construction of low carbon projects. And so 9 institutions such as the IStructE and our collaborators across architecture, MEP and so on got together in 2022 and started talking about how we might write a standard that standardizes exactly what we mean by a net zero carbon building. And most of the work for this was done through the sort of latter half of 2023 and all of last year. And what we've ended up publishing is a standard that takes the UK's 1.5 degree aligned carbon budget, which is rapidly dwindling, I must say, and it apportions it down for the built environment and for different sectors. And we've used that to work out what limits need to be set on embodied carbon, operational energy, what the minimum requirements are in terms of on-site renewable electricity generation, things like that. And all of these metrics come together in one standard that we then put out to the industry for free for them to use on projects if they would like to. And I use this photo just to try and explain the sort of appetite for this standard that's been out there across the industry, because this is quite a large conference and there's multiple talks going on at once in different parts of the conference arena. But you can see that this was sort of standing room only and 3 rows deep at that. This photo was probably taken in early 2023, I think, so right in the early days, and the interest has only ever grown. And I think what's interesting about the net zero carbon building standard is it's not perfect by any means, and we now launched it as a pilot so it can be used on projects, but we recognise that it'll probably be tweaked over the course of 2025 before we launch it as final version 1 at the end of the year. But the industry is completely behind the need for this to exist and the need to start using it on projects. And we know that we now have developers, financiers and architecture firms and engineering firms all asking, how do you design a building that meets the standard? How are we going to actually deliver on this stuff? Because once we've worked that out and we can start building in that way, we can then finally start saying we are building in this industry in ways that do align with a 1.5 degree trajectory. And I think that if anything, that just sort of like validates the need for a Part Z, and it proves that something like Part Z is achievable because we've effectively introduced the same sorts of limits that you see through regulation, albeit they are probably more stringent in the standard because they're 1.5 degree aligned. Big breath. So the final sort of 8 or 9 slides are really around trying to reflect on how success has been created, both within the institution and the wider industry. That's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour through changes that we've made. And I showed you Part Z and the net zero standard because those are big changes that the industry has made, or big initiatives that we've introduced. But what is it about these things that's enabled them to be successful? And I think that this is quite an important thing to reflect on. This is why I enjoy giving this presentation, because if we can work out what is working and why, then we can replicate it and we can sort of build on our progress made so far. The first thing I would just really validate is that we have checked in with members over the course of this process, and we're aware that at least in terms of their perception and their abilities, there has been real progress. So when we've asked members about their competency on things like carbon and material efficiency and biodiversity, it's all moved in the right direction at different speeds for different topics, but it's all moving in the right direction and continues to do so. So I just put that up to sort of validate that I'm speaking about this now with some sort of evidence behind it, not just my own views as to success. But why has this happened? So the first thing I'd say that was really important with this journey that the institution's been on is that direction for all of this came from the top. I said right at the start of this presentation that in the early days, the board of the institution passed this mandate that safety and sustainability would be treated as equal from now on. They're sort of two equal parts of a seesaw. And this was backed by the chief executive at the time, Martin Powell, and is now backed by his successor, Yasmin Becker. The board of trustees continues to hold this sort of statement in high regard. And of course, I was asked if I would join the institution in 2020 as a permanent member of staff to basically make these things happen. They were willing to put a paid member of staff into the organisation at a relatively senior level to make these things happen. This, I think, helped create change, not just because it put some time behind the project, but because it clearly it showed the importance of it as a topic. It places the importance on the subject, which opens doors to members of staff and those that we interact with actually engaging with the topic. When I was hired, I was put in the top left of this organogram, reporting straight into the chief exec. So things have changed since then because we now have a bigger technical team that I'm now part of. But the idea on these early days was that the head of climate action would work across the institution's work, across the various committees and panels and different departments of staff, and we would have influence across all of them. And that creates a wide change in a coordinated way. And I think that when you compare what we've done with some of the sort of initiatives I've seen elsewhere in the industry, where perhaps somebody quite junior has been given the task of trying to make sustainability change happen, they've really struggled because they've often felt like their hands are tied behind their back a bit because you need this senior buy-in. And so I think that sort of like importance of putting the topic near the top of the food chain was really sort of, it really bore fruit in this instance. I think the second thing I'd point out is there's a real sort of consistency on this topic over the last 5 years. Like I say, every single month, the magazine that goes to members has included some form of sustainability guidance within it. And that's been in various forms, from reuse guidance through to viewpoints on working with clients or developers in ways that will help change the brief, down to really practical things such as how do you reuse a steel beam from somebody else's project on your own project. But it's been really consistent. And in the early days, we had a sort of dedicated section within the magazine for all of this. And actually, over time, that's just transitioned into being a just general part of everything the magazine does. I now get asked to review the odd article from time to time by the editor, but for the most part, the articles that come in that are sent to the editor for review in the first place, that he often then says, can you incorporate X and Y as part of that? They've had sustainability incorporated within them anyway. So it's made it really clear to our members that this topic is for them, and it is something that they, that if they don't get behind, they're the ones who are the sort of oddities in the industry because everybody else is doing this stuff. There's also inconsistency in terms of reaching every corner of the institution's work. Like I say, that in those early days, I worked across the whole institution. In a way, I still do. I just don't sort of I sit in a different place in the organogram, but I still work across departments. And so we've seen this sort of like sustainability push come everywhere, from the young members groups through the awards down to what regional groups in different parts of the world do with their regular monthly meetings, down to our guidance, down to our CPD offerings and so on. So I think that consistency and that broad spread of this stuff basically translates as a statement that says, this is now your job. This is what it means to be a structural engineer. And that's helped get buy-in from the membership. We've also tried to be really clear and concise with the messaging around this sort of stuff. These are sort of statements that I found myself saying again and again and again over the last 5 years, and that they're very short, very clear, very concise messages, and they're all true. And there's lots of sort of evidence to back these things up. I think the point of trying to distill these messages down into clear terms, though, is that of course if you make this topic too complex, people think that it's not for them. They think that it's a topic for sustainability professionals to worry about. So it's too complicated. It can't be part of my job. Whereas if you just boil it down to sustainability is as important as safety, you care about safety, don't you? Then nobody can deny that, of course, sustainability is something they need to care about as well. If we point out all the ways that regulation is going to be coming anyway, therefore you better prepare for it. Whether you care about business sense or ethics or just ease of keeping your business going, keeping your employees employed in the future, you'll prepare for it and you'll change the way you work. And so I think that sort of repeated clear messaging has been really helpful too. And that's been supported, again, this is in terms of sort of clarity, that's been supported with this hierarchy that I put this briefly up on the screen earlier on the page that talks about our net zero structural design course. But this again was about trying to help members understand that there's a very clear sort of message with most of this stuff, which is simply we need to just get more efficient at our use of materials, and in our case structural materials, but if you're an architect listening to this, then it'll be in the case of all materials within construction. And that the biggest impacts we can have come from the top of this hierarchy. So by avoiding building things at all, we have the biggest impact, minimizing our use of stuff, and then the sort of clever and efficient design has a gradually smaller and smaller impact. And then actually the specification of lower carbon and lower impact materials, that's secondary in a way, because you can do that after you've made all these other decisions. And this message of use less stuff, which has almost become a bit of a mantra, as if saying, this isn't just about specifying a different type of concrete. It's about working out how you use less concrete. It's not about specifying whether the timber you're going to get is from one species or another. It's about first using it as efficiently as you possibly can. And then we'll talk about that bit next. That's really been heard by our members over the years. And then finally, very last point that I think has helped create this success. This has been a huge team effort. And I think that I felt throughout, like, my job has not been one of trying to be, I didn't start out as a specialist on this topic. I still don't feel like I'm a specialist on this topic. And I feel very grateful to all the people who've given time and shared their knowledge and their enthusiasm for sustainability with the wider membership. My job has simply been to find the people who know about this stuff and mobilize them and give them a platform when they speak. And so as such, we've had the right people speaking on the right topic. And this huge community has not just generated guidance and generated change, but they're also the ones who've taken ownership of it. And that ownership, I believe, means that change will last in the long term, because it means that if I step out of this job next week, the institution will keep making this change happen, and all these people on the screen will keep taking ownership for this topic that they've now become part of. And what this enables is that this enables us to be reactive in terms of when we spot an opportunity to change something, we've just been able to get on with it because we've said, well, who can help with that now? We haven't had to do these long 2-term plans, and I'm not a great believer in roadmaps and 2-year plans for things, if I'm completely honest, because I think that too much changes on the way there. We decided we needed to do something on regulation, so we found the right people to help us write Part Z, and we just got on with it and did it. So this sort of unlocking of abundance, this gives us this really relevant action happening at the right time, along with this long-term ownership. And so if I was to try and summarize all of these slides into one final slide, it looks a bit like this, which is that I think this combination of this leadership, this putting a topic of sustainability from the get-go, being consistent and clear with our messaging, and then empowering the whole of our membership, the whole of our organization, if you like, that's what's delivered such wide change. That's why we can point to 400 pieces of guidance on our resource map. That's why we've been able to change our professional membership requirements, change our rewards. That's how we've been able to create cross-industry initiatives like Part Z, like the standard. And for me, it's been really, really exciting. It feels like a very long time ago that I was in Rwanda first being taught about the need to consider things like carbon emissions, and it feels like a very long time ago that I landed back in the UK with a bump in the middle of COVID. I was struggling to work out how to best spend my lockdown time in order to not go mad at my in-laws in their house who were putting up with me, and so I feel quite fortunate that that's all led me into this job, led me into this great community of engineers to make this change happen. And I think the changes we have made in the institution will be long lasting. I think they'll continue to change. We're already talking about next revisions to much of our guidance. And personally, I'm quite excited to see where we go next as an institution. Thank you very much.
Hi, Will. I'm Janelle Wynyard, and I am the UK Specification and Education Manager for Abodo Wood. Really enjoyed your presentation today. I just have a few questions for you so the audience can find out a little bit more about IStructE, if that's all right. Now I'll crack on. I'm not a member of the IStructE. Are there ways for me to access the sustainability guidance and training you've mentioned?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is that a decent proportion of this stuff is free for non-members as well. So anything that we've sort of categorized as thought leadership, such as our How to Calculate Embodied Carbon Guide, and quite a few pieces of guidance that went into the structural engineer, they're made free anyway. So if you go onto our website, if you look at the resource map and you start to click on the links, you'll see that a bunch of them are free anyway. For things that then sit behind a paywall, there's always a discount for members, and quite often things are free for members that are paid for by non-members. And if you are not a structural engineer but you want to be associated with the institution, you can sign up to become what's called an affiliate. So it's quite a sort of cheap version of membership. I think it's probably about a quarter of the price of full membership, and then that gives you all access to the same benefits you'd get as a full member. So as an example of that, the Embodied Carbon Basics course, which is this e-learning thing that I showed earlier, that teaches you all the same stuff as sits in our How to Calculate Embodied Carbon Guide, that's completely free for members. And I believe that the cost of affiliate membership is less than the cost of that course would be if you paid for it as a non-member. So things like that, are a bit of a non-brainer if you wanted to sign up to get free access to that stuff.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, you're a global institution. What impact has this had on the way you've approached sustainability requirements?
So we, it's interesting because we've got about 30,000 members around the world, and 20,000 of them are in the UK, but that's something 10,000 of them are spread around elsewhere, and that's across something like 130-ish countries of the world. So lots of different backgrounds, lots of different contexts, the way in which they work. So this has had an impact because it's meant that when, in terms of giving out guidance, it just means that some guidance will be more applicable in some places than others. We're really conscious, for example, that in certain cities in the world, there's a real need to build new stuff, and quite a lot of it, in order to increase the quality of people's lives. And there's a lot of cities out there that don't have the sort of built environment and the rich urban tapestry that we have in the likes of places like London, for example. So there's that sort of knowledge about how guidance we use differently in different places. When we talk about the need to build nothing, that's not always true. It's a question that needs to be asked, but often you'll say, well, actually, we do just need a hospital in this part of rural Malawi, for example. So there's that aspect. The other thing that I think has been quite important for us has been thinking about the standards that we've updated. So when it comes to membership requirements, our examination, for example, we had to do this in a way that meant that you could still pass the exam whether you were a practitioner in Birmingham or Burundi, right? The rule was always, think of a member in any country in the world. Are they still able to apply to this stuff? And the reason why that was important was because some parts of the world, people's clients are not asking for this stuff yet. We know that. That's just a reality. And so we were quite careful to make these changes in a way that anyone could meet them if they wanted to. And so with the exam as an example, it requires you to do embodied carbon calculations, but it's a relatively basic calc that it asks of you. And it's something you could teach yourself in your own time, whether or not it's coming up on your projects yet. And yet we were still really keen that this is a global requirement because, of course, it does need to be a part of every structural engineer's skill set, regardless of where you work. And it's only a matter of time before you would be doing such calculations on a project, regardless of where in the world you're working.
Thanks, Will. You've spoken about the sustainability successes you've had as an institution, but how much of this do you think is applicable to private businesses?
So I think if you think back to that final slide that said it had the 5 bubbles on it: leadership, importance, consistency, clarity, and empowerment. I think those are the same whether you're looking at a charitable body like ours, or a private consultancy, or you might work as a contractor, you might work as a developer. These sorts of things, they have the same impact across all of those walks of the industry. At the end of the day, if you want to create real lasting change on a topic like sustainability, you have to have buy-in from the top of that organization. If that's not there, you're going to struggle. And so a starting point in a private consultancy would be the same as ours, and it would be to get buy-in from the senior staff. The topic then needs to be given prominence, importance. It needs to have clear and consistent messaging around it, and the wider staff of that organisation need to be empowered to make the changes that they really need to see. They need to be listened to when they say, well, actually, we're really going to struggle to make that happen. That needs to be treated seriously, and that staff needs to be worked with to work out, well, what can we do instead? So I think that my hope is that it's completely relevant, even if you're listening to this as, whether you're an architect working in a 3-person practice, or you're a project manager who works for a 20,000 person international organization. I think all of those things are still the same.
What advice would you have to someone trying to make changes like this within their firm?
I would suggest starting by I'd start with that leadership piece. I would start by asking yourself, how can you get buy-in from the top of your organization as to the importance of this? Mike Cook, who I mentioned, who's been a sort of mentor to me over the last 5 years, he always talks about allies. He always asks, who are your allies on this topic? Who is it within, whether it's the institution or the wider industry or the world of policy, who is it that will back you on this topic? Mm-hmm. And if they don't exist, who is it who you can find who could become that ally, who could back you on this topic? And so if you're trying to make change within your firm, who is it within your firm who you think can get behind you in enabling you to do this stuff, that has some influence that points upwards towards the leadership of your firm? It might be that in your firm, you work quite closely with and the founder of the firm, and so you can go directly to them. Or it might be you work in an organization where there's so many sort of tiers of leadership above you that you can't expect to get there. But who can you get who's in that direction that might back you on this stuff? And go and speak with them and try and persuade them of the importance of this topic, and try and ask them what they think you could do together in order to get this topic on the agenda of that firm, and then start sort of working that way. I think once you've got the buy-in from the leadership, then that stuff around importance and consistency and clarity can follow a whole lot more easier. But if you don't have that buy-in from the top at the start, then it's going to be a bit of a uphill struggle, I'd say.
What's next for IStructE?
So, like I said, we're about to publish our sort of 5-year look back to the progress we've made so far. But we're also really conscious that, we started on this journey in 2020 at a time where there was an IPCC report out that had come out in 2018 that talks about the need to effectively halve emissions by 2030 and get to net zero by 2050. It was the special report on 1.5 degrees. And we're now halfway to 2030. Right, and we said we were going to halve emissions by 2030. And a lot of our members and their organisations and parts of the industry have set out similar asks, or similar ambitions, if you like, that they were going to try and halve their emissions by 2030. And I don't believe we've achieved that. I think we've fallen quite a long way short of it. So there's clearly still a huge amount of work to be done, and there's a real need to sort of double down on this topic. We also see in the world of politics around the world, this is becoming a more difficult topic to engage with rather than one that's being easy to engage with. It's interesting because, we saw the California wildfires have been all over the news here in the UK recently. I don't know what it's like where you're listening, but climate change should be front and centre, and it's not quite managing to in the way that it was in 2019. So we know as an institution we've got to do more than ever to keep pushing on this topic and to keep driving change. On the back page of that 5-year report that's coming out, confusingly, we titled End of Year Report because it was the end of last year, but it looks back at all 5. On the back page of that, we set out a 3-year strategy for what we're going to focus on over the next 3 years. And our 3 topics of importance are embodied carbon, because we need to continue to push on this as a sort of mandatory requirement for all members. And we're going to continue to call on it for regulation around it as a topic around the world. The second one is on our use of resources more generally. So that's looking at things like reuse, circular economy, but also those broader environmental impacts of our resources and the way we use them. So beyond just carbon, so the sort of so-called embodied ecological impacts of our materials. What's the impact on sea life or life on land when we extract sand and gravel to make our concrete, those sorts of things. And then the third and final topic is one of regenerative design. How do we move beyond just talking about doing less harm and start moving towards a world where structural engineers and other parts of this industry can design in a way that fundamentally, does more good rather than doing less harm? How do we work in a way where the built environment helps to sort of clear up the mess that's been created over the last couple of 100 years of industrialization, not just making less mess? It's a bit like, I guess, if you woke up the morning after a house party and you saw beer bottles and pizza boxes scattered everywhere, you wouldn't decide that the best way to deal with this was to order some more beer and pizza, but maybe less than you'd ordered the day before. This is not about making less mess. You would do the opposite. You'd go into cleaning mode. You'd grab a brush and you'd start to clean up. And that's the regenerative design piece. So how do we move the industry in a way that starts to clean up rather than just making things worse, but less worse? So those are our sort of three next themes for the next 3 years. We'll be keeping an eye on them. We'll be trying to do a sort of yearly update to that rolling strategy. But yeah, that's the direction we're pushing in, and we're going to keep pushing stronger than ever before, I think.
Hey, thanks, Will. Appreciate your time.
Welcome back, and I hope you really enjoyed that talk by Will and you took a lot of notes. And again, that was a pre-record. So if you have any questions, please fire them in a chat and you'll find Jay curating them to fire them on to the speaker in question. Or you can track them down online as well via LinkedIn or the website there. So it leaves me to thank you for your time, for joining us for this Teulo/Abodo CPD webinar. It's been great to have you with us for company, and I hope you really enjoyed it and got a lot from it. We invite you to already put in your diaries for the next webinar series, and that's, looking at my notes, is going to be the 18th of February. So please put that in your diary, but you'll get a notice from us as well to highlight that next opportunity to increase your CPD experience and points to keep you on the road to keeping up to date, especially in the sustainability practices that we all need to be up to date with. Thank you very much for your time. It leaves me to thank Jay and Harley for the production crew here. And again, join us next time when we'll be exploring some amazing topics through the Abodo CPD webinar series. Thank you very much.